often hidden. The American Society for Quality Control has created the American Customer Satisfaction Index, which is an example of a method for providing the economic indicator of the value of customer capital. Human capital represents the knowledge, skill, and capability of individual employees to provide solutions to customers. Structural capital consists of everything that remains when the employees go home: databases, customer files, software manuals, trademarks, organizational structures, and so on. You might be wondering if this is overdoing it. You might ask if is it that important? Lou Platt, chairman and president and CEO of Hewlett-Packard, says, "Successful companies of the 21st century will be those who do the best jobs of capturing, storing, and leveraging what their employees know." About now, I think it is time to pause, but first let me call your attention to the worldwide interest in knowledge management that was underscored by the announcement last month at the Knowledge Management Conference in London of the 1998 Most Admired Knowledge Enterprises, makes them. Sponsored by Telios, an independent knowledge management research organization, awards were given out to the top 5 companies, recognized for their world-class knowledge creation and sharing efforts. The 20 top-ranking organizations are Lucent Technologies, Intel, Monsanto, Ernst & Young, Xerox, Arthur Andersen, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, 3M, Nokia of Finland, Buckman Labs, Scandia, GE, Anderson Consulting, Sun Microsystems, Pfizer, Siemens of Germany, Chevron, and British Petroleum. If you are interested in learning more about what these organizations do, you can access the Make Some study on the internet at www.knowledgebusiness.com. In the next segment, we will look at strategies and actions you can use to become more responsive to your customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finnigan. Let us begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. Our first call is from Mexico. It is from La Universidad La Salle in Mexico City, Mexico.
Good morning. The question is the following. Knowledge of most admired enterprises on the website that you've recommended, is it very useful for each one of the companies or organizations, or is it specific for one, or what kind of knowledge is this that you're recommending? Thank you.
This is a description of the kinds of activities each of these organizations have been engaged in, and in some cases it's fairly expansive description of those activities and how they got started. In other instances, it's maybe not as revealing, but it will, I think, give an interested observer an opportunity to find out what other people are doing, and also get some contacts so that people that you can reach and exchange information with. It's a starting point.
Our next question is also from Mexico. It is from, again, La Universidad La Salle, from Pachuca in the state of Hidalgo in Mexico.
Good morning. Thank you. We would like to ask you to please elaborate a little bit more on the new way to measure productivity. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me try and do that. The true measures of productivity today will depend, of course, certainly on the product and the process, but it is much more value-driven than it is the traditional process of measuring volumes, measuring output in terms of quantity. Productivity is much more tied today to what the customer views as value for the investment that they are willing to make. To the degree that organizations are able to therefore satisfy their customers' requirements, meet their customers' demands, is much more a driver of the success of the productive process than it is necessarily the return on the investment alone. Certainly things have got to be done profitably, but if one takes a look at an example at a Hewlett-Packard and the price of printers and what they've experienced over the last 5 years or so, that price has been going down, yet the profitability of Hewlett-Packard has been going up, and the reason for that is that people have been satisfied with the performance of those machines at the price and have therefore been willing to pay a more premium price for the cassettes for toner, etc. I hope that helps.
Our next question is again from Mexico. It's from La Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara in the city of Guadalajara, the state of Jalisco in Mexico.
See, we have a question. Could you please elaborate a little bit more about the future of human resources in Latin America for the 21st century and the challenge that it has before the face-to-face, vis-a-vis the developed countries?
Well, that's an excellent question, and not just for Latin America, just globally. One, because it is my profession. Let me speak to it from my perspective, and you will have to internalize my response as to whether or not you believe you're experiencing the same things in your own countries and your own environments. Human resources sometimes is described as the acquisition, the retention, and the development of good people. Kind of a generality, but I think that probably is a good description. Unfortunately, many of us in the business have been caught up over the last many years with issues around the law, issues around data keeping and administration, and we tend to have become much more bureaucratic than we really have been always professional in terms of those issues of acquisition, retention, development. What is happening now, partly because of technology and the ability to take much of the bureaucratic and the administrative roles of human resources and centralize it and in some cases automate it. It is freeing up the human resource assets to be able to go back and focus much more on what the organization's needs are, both in terms of organizational development and people development. In my own company, the merger of quality and human resources has been a slow but very deliberate attempt to bring together the assets of organizational development and human development into one group, working much more strategically. And I think human resource professionals are going to have to become much more engaged than perhaps we have been in the past in the strategic direction of our organizations and the significance of our role in the development of a key element of those strategies, which is people. And again, in an information or knowledge-driven environment, people become much more significant than other issues.
Our next call is from Paraguay, from la Universidad Americana in Asunción, Paraguay.
Good afternoon. Greetings from Asunción, Paraguay. I was remembering a very famous commercial that Lee Iacocca, the Chrysler CEO, had announced on TV, and which said that one should lead, follow, or get out of the way. In English, lead, follow, or out of the way. Do you think that the organizations that are in developing countries have any other option other than follow? In other words, the second option? Given the difficult circumstances and situations in which the region is currently, and what do you think is the best way to handle this benchmarking concept, given the great disadvantages in terms of infrastructure and also, and particularly human resources, human capital? Thank you.
Big question. I'll try and give a couple of short answers, if I may. I understand the challenge that you are speaking of. In some cases, existing organizations may find that it is necessary that for a while they literally do follow a trend or a larger organizational direction. Alliances become, I think, an excellent way for organizations to acquire new knowledge, new technology, and new competence to move in new directions. And so many organizations in emerging environments will find it's necessary that they establish an alliance for a time. As they grow much more internally competent, they can look for and establish their own directions, keeping in mind that the marketplace is going to be global or international, and the technologies that will allow organizations to participate are not constrained by boundaries, and they're not constrained necessarily by the resources of an individual country other than the brains of its own people. Benchmarking, I believe that benchmarking is in most organizations has become institutionalized. If it is not in your own, I think it's a practice that you just absolutely have to adopt, whether it's done by web research or whether it's done by visits to other organizations. Your management is just going to have to realize they need to know what's going on by the people who do things the best.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from La Universidad Autónoma de Baja California Sur in the city of La Paz in the state of Baja California Sur, Mexico.
Muy buenos días. Good morning. My question is the following. What difference is there between the work teams or quality circles and the working communities under this new concept?
Good question. In terms of process, there is a great deal of similarity. In terms of real practice, there's a great deal of difference. The kinds of communities of work or communities of practice that are evolving today in our organizations are they're much more emergent. They're emergent in the terms of need in order to accomplish a job, where groups of people are coming together because they recognize their interdependence, they recognize the value of one another, versus the more explicit nature of a quality circle, oftentimes created by management to do a particular thing. What we call a community of practice or community of work is really a recognition of a true reality that people are exchanging information with one another and working together, and organizations should learn to be able to facilitate that. We'll talk some more about that in the second session, I believe.
Next, we have a question from Mexico, from La Universidad Autónoma de Chihuahua, in the city of Chihuahua and the state of Chihuahua in Mexico.
Good morning. The question is, how can we measure the intellectual capital in the organizations in order to know what the real value is and to integrate it into the financial statements? Thank you.
Great question. If I had a detailed answer to this, I think I could make a small fortune. This is a difficult challenge. One of the first things, however, that we do know that is necessary is to acknowledge the value of intellectual property, to recognize that it is essential for organizations to capture in some way what those competencies are and what those intellectual properties are, both from a patented point of view, but also from the point of view of being able to pass that knowledge onto other people. Exactly how you put that into a financial statement, we don't need. Hopefully, if you have some familiarity with what is called a balanced scorecard, would be one methodology of approaching that. We don't have time to get into it right now. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But perhaps one of the most important things that you can do from a financial point of view is to acknowledge what is the intellectual property of the organization, and is it identified, is its value understood well enough by management that it knows how to protect it and it knows how to utilize it. If I can use a Xerox example really quickly, Xerox began with the use of xerography, which is not a technology that is taught in schools. It's learned at hand at a bench. A few years ago, we were in danger of losing that intellectual property because all of the real xerographic experts were on the verge of retiring. And it was necessary to make very concerted efforts to document that knowledge and that information so that it could be passed on to other people. That's one way of documenting the value of intellectual property within an organization.
Our next question should be in English. It is from Brazil. It is from the Serviço Nacional de Aprendizagem Comercial in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, the city of Porto Alegre, Brazil.
Good afternoon. I'd like to make you a question. What are the most used tools for efficient benchmarking activity? Thank you.
The best tools for benchmarking are, first of all, a good model, a process that is clearly understood, that you clearly understand, and that you can explain to the organizations you wish to partner with or those you wish to benchmark with, so that you all follow the same basic process. The next important tool is really understanding the most significant work processes within your organization. You know, what are those things that happen that are really key to your success, and do you do those well? And do you know how to measure how well you do them, so that when you go out to other organizations, you can, not only can explain process, that is the model that you're following, but you can also explain what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and be able to quantify in some way how that process operates, so that they have something that they can compare to.
Our next question is from Colombia, from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes in the city of Medellín in Colombia.
Buenos días. Good morning. Us adults have a tendency to reject changes, to resist changes, and that's why we should try to modify attitudes of those who should be learning something new or whom we would like to train? How can we develop an attitude of change and a change in attitude within the organizations in order for them to be able to easily adapt to the new circumstances and new models that we're trying to implement?
I'm going to try and give you a really short answer to a pretty complicated question, but an excellent question. We are resistant to change. And the best way to get an organization and individuals, I think, to move to change is for them to understand better how things are today. You know, how are things currently? And if you're going to change something, what is it going to be like once the change is implemented? In other words, what is that future situation going to look like? So that people can look at where they are and where you want them to go. There are things when we change, don't change. And people need to understand those things that they are doing that are going to remain the same so they can be comfortable and that their entire lives are not going to be turned upside down. So in other words, very succinctly, where are we now? Where are we going? What will we continue to do? And what are we going to be doing differently? And with that, I think people can be supportive of any change direction you want.
Once again from Mexico, from La Universidad de Sonora, in the city of Hermosillo, the state of Sonora in Mexico.
Good morning. I would like to congratulate all of you for these wonderful presentations, a very fascinating topic. And my question is the following. Definitely, training is an essential element in organizations today, but this also brings some sort of independence and freedom to the participants in that process. And that means that the organizations do have a certain risk in that, because the workers, the personnel, the staff also have more freedom, and we're giving them the elements that make them have more mobility in the workplace. And so how could we limit this effect in order to retain these people in our organization for loyalty purposes? How can we do this?
Excellent observation. Very good question. There is no one single answer to that question. The condition of, in an information-driven environment, the condition of people acquiring strategic competence and being able to market under the rules of supply and demand that competence is the reality of the new millennium. Why would a person stay with a given organization? There can be lots of reasons, I suppose. The challenge of the technology, the compensation, the other kinds of perks that might go with it. But there may be also a real key in that the commitment an organization makes to its people in terms of their learning for current activity and future activity may be a way of saying to them, stay with us, and if in fact you decide to leave us in the future, you will leave a much more marketable kind of a person having been with us than having been somewhere else. I think ultimately it's what I can learn from what I'm doing from the organization is why people will stay.
Another question from Mexico, from La Comisión Federal de Electricidad, División Sureste, in the state of Oaxaca, the city of Oaxaca, in Mexico.
Morning. Our question is the following. The intellectual capital that we have in Mexico is, of course, very important. We have a lot of knowledge, but the financial capital is rather scarce. So what do you think, how do you see a country like ours? What do you suggest?
Well, I think almost any nation in this world that is able to demonstrate to investors a market capability, a competence to support investment in that market, will be able to receive those investments. Whether it's Vietnam emerging as the new Silicon Valley, or East Germany emerging as the new West Germany in the economic future, Mexico for a while was the leading recipient of investment, and I think that will continue to the degree that that countries and environments are self-protective. However, I think that their ability to participate in this new economy is constrained, and investors may or may not pursue that way. Not being an economist, that's about the best answer I can give you.
Our next question is from the United States. I think it's in English. It is going to be from the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C.
Yes, good morning. Given the culture in Latin America in which information is not shared so readily, how would this tendency affect the future of benchmarking in Latin America?
That's a very good question, and that comes up all of the time. And I understand the problem, and I'm empathetic to the difficulties. Increasingly, however, as the constraints around borders have risen and continue to rise, companies and organizations, regardless of their location, including Mexico and other parts of Latin America, are finding it necessary to create alliances and to find themselves in competition with organizations that they didn't previously have to compete with, and that they need to improve their processes as a result. And the proven way of being able to do that is by benchmarking. And I know that many organizations in Mexico that I have visited and spoken with on benchmarking have gone into it with some reluctance and some difficulty, but they have found it to be successful, and it is my experience, particularly in Mexico, is that it is a growing tool.
Our last question for this first session is from Panama, from La Universidad Tecnológica de Panamá in Panama City.
Good morning. The question is the following. How can we promote amongst managers of a developing country to give more value to the not so skilled workers in a government organization or a general organization, a private one? So how can we give them more importance if they don't have any education, just blue collar workers?
Difficult question. I'm going to stick with my thesis and suggest that any organization's major asset is its people. To the degree that the organization is able to enhance the value of that asset, which will mostly be by the development of skills and by information, I firmly believe is the best way it develops its own strength, both to increase its productivity and to increase its ability to compete.
We're going to take one more question. This is going to be from Cuba. It is going to be from Cine Internet in La Habana in Cuba.
Good morning. Our question is the following. Undoubtedly, within the new economy and its wider context, digital economy is generating very strong and deep changes in organizations regarding competition and cooperation. How do you think this new economy can influence our developing countries, considering that this has also vis-a-vis the industrialized countries?
I think I understand the question clearly, and I think that we'll talk some about this in this next segment. But the major foundation of the thesis of the global economy is the realization of market opportunity in a whole new set of regions and environments that were not previously believed to be available. So whether it is in Cuba, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, the industrialized nations recognize the value of those markets as markets. And those markets will become available as people are able to acquire the resources in order to purchase goods and services that they require. And ultimately they will be sources of product for the digital age. They will also be sources of consumers for the digital age.
Thank you for your excellent questions. Let us begin now with Module 2, in which Mr. Finnigan will discuss benchmarking, competitive intelligence, and knowledge management.